on your side of your head, or
on one half
of your head?
And the discussion was only here.
How can you locate what part of your
I know, I'm puzzled as well, so I don't know. But one thing for sure is that, one thing that you will notice is that when we...
Sorry.
I'll send you out of the class.
I just worried.
Where was I now? Okay, yeah. So when we're doing this Vipassana practice, or any Vipassana practice, and we'll see this a little bit tomorrow, I think, when we do a couple of Vipassana meditations, is that this investigation we're doing is quite subtle. And if the mind is not very sharp and clear and focused, it's not so easy. And then we either get confused, or the intellectual mind takes hold and gets an answer. And so what I'm suggesting is that if we're finding a sort of difficulties in the Vipassana practice, then one good thing to do is to deepen our Shamatha practice, and you'll find that it actually comes a lot easier if the mind is sharp and clear. It's the same as in life. If we're at work and we have to try and solve a very difficult problem, if our mind is not very sharp and clear and focused, I mean, there's no chance we're going to solve it. We're just going to go round and round and here and there. And so maybe this experience might sort of subside if you develop a little bit more stability, clarity in the shamatha, perhaps, but I don't know. Yeah.
There is in each stage there is a time recommended to meditate?
The amount of time? Not really, but I mean, it's like a ballpark figure. I think in his attention revolution and so forth, and you see this sometimes in some of the meditation texts. That's where I think he's got these numbers from. That in the beginning couple of stages were very short. In fact, often in Alan Wallace, when he leads these shamatha retreats, he generally does sessions of 24 minutes, and the reason for that, I mean, when he's leading these retreats. The reason for that is that in the original meditation texts from India, in ancient India, they didn't, the system of time, they didn't use minutes and hours and so forth. They had a completely different system. In fact, they used to divide up the day into 60 units. So 1/60th of a day, of course, is 24 minutes. And that unit was called the Gatika. So often in the meditation text, it would say sometimes, like, as a beginner, 1 Gatika is a good amount of time to meditate. So that's why he does 24 minutes. So, and I think that's, for many beginners is a good amount of time. Maybe for some it's a bit too long, maybe 20 or even maybe 15, but somewhere in that area, probably you're talking in the first few stages. And then if you want to meditate longer, then like we did, 2 15-minute sessions and so forth. And then by about stage 4, we're probably meditating up to an hour or so, and then as we go further, up around 6 and 7 and 8, 6, 7, so 2 or 3 hours we can meditate. By 9 we can do 4 hours. So, that sort of thing. But it's not like, it's not like now on stage 3 I have to go to 45 minutes or something. It's not really like that. But you'll find that as you go deeper, you will be meditating longer because you'll need to go further, because if you're doing short sessions, as you go deeper, you won't be able to go further. You need that extra time to go that bit further. But again, it's always quality over quantity. Okay, so let's have a look now at, so we've been looking at this afternoon, the Vipassana practice as in the Theravada tradition. And so we can briefly review that by looking at this 3 vehicles chart. So we see in the 3 vehicles chart, this is the Theravada vehicle, of course, based on the Pali scriptures. is based on the system of the Four Noble Truths. And so the goal of the spiritual path, of course, is nirvana. And we see in the chart there someone who's achieved nirvana is called an arhat. They have eliminated all the mental afflictions and suffering. And to strive for that goal, we develop this aspiration of renunciation. And remember, renunciation, really, the Sanskrit word nisarana literally means to move out of, to move away from. It's the aspiration or wish to move out of, away from suffering, samsara, towards the goal of nirvana. And how to do that are the practices, the fourth noble truth, truth of the path. The practices are these noble eightfold path, these 8 practices, which we saw you could subsume into these 3 core areas of practice of ethics, concentration, wisdom. So again, ethics is avoiding harmful behaviour. Concentration is the shamatha practice, although in the Theravada traditions, normally you won't see the word shamatha as the concentration practice. Rather, you'll hear the word jhana. So that is even a higher level of concentration than shamatha. So in Theravada traditions, when they talk about them doing concentration practice, they often just say they're doing jhana practice. But it's the same as saying doing shamatha practice. And then, of course, the wisdom here is the vipassana practice. And so here in the last column, you see that there are these 3 marks of existence, the 3 main insights we are cultivating in the path to nirvana. So first is impermanence, of course, an insight into impermanence, insight into suffering, or dukkha in Sanskrit, and then an insight into no self. So it's the no self, or it's the grasping to self, that we need to eliminate if we really want to progress along the path. So to realise that no self, and then also to eliminate all the mental afflictions that go with that. So here in the Theravada tradition, when they talk about the stages we go through to the goal of nirvana, often you'll come across either what's called the 4 results model or the 8-person model, but it's the same model. So let's have a look at it. So this is, so previously we've been looking at different models for shamatha practice. So the most common, the main model we've been looking at is this 9-stage model to achieve shamatha. But then also we looked briefly at the 4-stage model, the waterfall and so forth. Then we also briefly touched on 2 other models. There was another 4-stage model, the 4 modes of mindfulness, the single-pointed, manifest, lack of mindfulness, and the self-illuminating. So that was another model that we touched on. But the main model for shamatha is this one, the 9-stage model, and if we're using the mind, the 4-stage model. So that's describing the stages to shamatha. So now we're talking vipassana. So the goal of this practice, of course, is shamatha, and these are the 9 stages to that goal. The goal of vipassana in Theravada is nirvana, to achieve nirvana. So we have a model of what are the stages that we go through in vipassana practice to achieve that final goal of nirvana. And so here they often talk about the 4 results or the 8 persons, which we'll look at shortly. So there are basically 4 stages we go through. The first one is called stream enterer, and I'll talk a bit more about each one shortly. The next stage is called once returner. The third stage is called non-returner. And of course the 4th stage is arhat, because when we achieve nirvana, we've become an arhat. So the 4th stage, or the 4th result, is the final result of arhat. So that's nirvana. So, first, of course, we need to develop this aspiration for nirvana, renunciation, to enter the path. And then, of course, we engage in these vipassana practices. And then we become a stream enterer when we realize no self. In fact, they often talk about, what's the term they use? The three, I think they're called the three fetters. There's three things a stream enterer realizes or abandons. One is to realize no self, and then you've eliminated doubt with respect to the path, and also you've overcome thinking that ascetic practices or somehow is going to get you to liberation. But the main thing here is realizing no self. So you've entered the stream, meaning you've entered the stream to strive for nirvana. And this is a very simplified model, but of course within that there are many very different variations. So when you look at each one of these states and what are the various possibilities, then you end up with a very complex map of all the different possibilities. But sort of this is the main milestones that we sort of go through. And often it's said here that once we have this, then we will take at most 7 lives to achieve nirvana from this point.
7 lives?
Yeah, at most. At most. We could achieve it in that life.
In the first step,
Sorry?
the first step, we start vipassana, how much time it takes?
Well, it depends on how much effort we put in and how much shamatha we have and so forth. It's when we come to realize no self. So to be a stream enterer, of course, we need single point of concentration.
You need to be at Shamatha level.
Yes, basically.
Far away, right?
Well, not necessarily. Not necessarily. So once then we continue in the vipassana practice, and then we move to the next level, which is called once returner. And a once returner, it said, is someone who comes back one more time in the human realm, or desire realm, rather, before achieving nirvana. So one more time in the what's called desire realm. That's the realm that we live in. A non-returner is someone who doesn't come back into this desire realm. But if you read the fine print here, it means that they can go off into a different type of existence before becoming an arhat. But they definitely won't come back into this realm that we exist in here called the desire realm. Because there is, maybe to sort of clarify this a bit, is in Buddhism we talk about 3 realms. There's what's called desire realm, form realm, and formless realm. These are different planes of existence. And all of these realms are within samsara. Desire realm is where we are now. And it's called desire realm because the main driving force is desire, craving, attachment. And of course in desire realm is not just humans, animals and other types of beings are also included in the desire realm here. But then the form realm is like a higher plane of existence. that has gone beyond this craving and attachment. Still in samsara, but it's gone beyond that. And the way we end up here is we can get there, if we want to go there, through developing high levels of samadhi. And if we develop high levels of samadhi in this life, then we can end up in this plane of existence in the next life. And there's even a higher level. So, in fact, in the Theravada tradition, when they talk about this concentration practice, they're talking about jhanas. So, if you develop this high levels of concentration of jhana, you could end up being born in this type of existence. It's a very high level plane of existence. And then there are even higher levels of samadhi called samapati. And if you develop those, you can end up in this high level of existence called formless realm. But all of these three realms are still within samsara, within suffering. But these are higher planes of existence. So when it talks about non-returner, it means someone who's a human doesn't come back again in a human, but they may end up going here somewhere, and then from that point they become arhat. So it gets all very involved, so we won't go into it's all a bit complicated. But so that, and then the final goal, of course, is an arhat, and an arhat is someone who's eliminated all suffering and mental afflictions, has achieved the goal of nirvana, the arhat. And then so you see that often they talk about the 4 results, but sometimes they talk about the 8 persons. And the 8 persons is, for each of these 4 results, you can talk about an approacher, means someone who's coming close to that, and an abider is someone who's actually got there. So then these 4 results, we can make it into 8. So someone who's coming to this goal, someone who's there, someone who's moving towards this goal, someone who's actually there. So that's the approacher and abider. So we have then 8. So we can talk about these 8 persons, but it's basically the same as the 4 results model. Now, one thing in the Theravada tradition, that what they say is that with the arhat, and an arhat often is translated into English as something like foe destroyer, someone who's destroyed the enemy, and of course the enemy is the mental afflictions and suffering. When that arhat achieves nirvana, and then at the end of that life, the body finishes, then they end up in a state called nirvana without remainder. Remainder means nothing left over, meaning that when this body dies, at the end of that life of the arhat, then the contaminated body, the body that's came into this life, and the mind are blown out like a candle. So remember that etymology we saw of the word nirvana was the act of fully blowing out, was one etymology. So in the Theravada system, it said that when that arhat dies, then blown out like a candle, meaning never to come back again into the world. But then you ask, well, what's left out? What's that state like? And they say it's indescribable. But that's their assertion. The Mahayana, when we look at the emptiness tomorrow, would not agree with that. In fact, the Mahayana would say that when the arhat, the body finishes, then of course the arhat doesn't come back into samsara, because samsara is... so remember, this is not samsara. Samsara is a state of mind. If we have mental afflictions in our mind, we're stuck in samsara. So when we become an arhat and we achieve nirvana, it's not like we end up on some place over the back of the hill here called nirvana. So nirvana is not a place. Again, it's a state of mind. So if we sit down now and eliminate all of our mental afflictions and thereby suffering and become an arhat, we are in nirvana. Same place, but we're in nirvana. So remember, nirvana and samsara are not places. They're state of mind. So therefore, the Mahayana assertion, the system we're going to look at tomorrow, this idea of emptiness, would say when an arhat, at the end of the life, the body finishes, of course they don't come back in samsara because finished, but they're not blown out like a candle. They enter into a mental state of solitary peace, because that was the goal. So they end up in this state of solitary peace for a long, long, long time. But while they're in that state, it's solitary, meaning they have no connection with anything else in the universe. They're just in isolation, the mind. And then, but at some point, that they'll pop out of that state, because from the Mahayana perspective, nirvana is not the final goal. The final goal is enlightenment. So therefore, this is only a temporary state. They'll pop out of it. They'll realise they haven't finished the job yet. They will come back in the world, but not in samsara. So they could come back here, for example, but they would not be in samsara, and then they continue the journey to enlightenment. So that's the Mahayana assertion. But this is the standard model that you'll see, and once you look at that in detail, then it gets a little bit complicated, but that's the sort of the simple version. So that is the model for the stages of progress in the Vipassana practice in the Theravada tradition. Any questions about anything there?
I guess this whole architectural structure was not developed in one day. It's a process, historic process around hundreds of years. But I would like to ask, in Judaism, for example, they got certain other structures, but it developed because of debates between rabbis. This said this, this said this, and there are certain rules. Who is right? If Mr. This, Rabbi this said this, that, okay, with the years, it became such a big monument. What I'm asking is, you are describing the finished structure as it stands today, probably. Or not?
I think what you'll find here is that this structure is based on people's reports of what they did.
Yeah, so that's exactly what I want to ask. This structure that you're describing, what's the origin? It's also debates, it's diaries.
No, it's not debates, it's people's experiences. It's like someone has become arhat and they said, okay, I did this, this and this, I went through here. They recorded that, someone else said this, and then they put it all together.
So there are today scripture describing these diaries? These diaries exist?
Well, I don't know about diaries, but you have, I don't know about diaries, but that's where a lot of this information is coming from. It's collected from a lot of past masters who wrote texts about various things and described things like this. So a lot of that's coming from there.
So there are texts today in Pali, Sanskrit, not in English.
Well, I don't know about, because remember, what we have to remember is a lot of the original Pali and Sanskrit texts were destroyed or lost.
Okay, but they are copied probably. So what was left? Oral?
No. Well, then because a lot of the original things they were using as a source for the later texts,
I see.
And some of those are existing. But I think a lot of the early texts. Well, when there was invasions into India in the 12th century, I think a lot of things were destroyed at that time. So how much of the original texts are still extant, I don't know.
But the original texts exist from the 12th century?
I think there are some texts, yeah, I mean, even earlier.
And they say that they are based on diaries or
Well, I wouldn't say diaries.
Oral testimony.
I mean, generally, that's what that's the origin. I think is normally, and of course, the other thing we need to remember is that the Buddhist assertion is that someone who's achieved this sort of state has a lot of ability of mind in terms of seeing other people's minds and everything. So they can see a lot of things that we can't see. So they can then report on a lot of things like this, like other types of beings and stuff like that.
Okay, but so today what we know about Buddhism, that this type that you're describing, is based on transcript around 12th century, which collected or edited or...
Well, I think a lot of this stuff you can trace back, some of it right back to the time of the Buddha.
Yes?
Mm.
Not transcript.
No, transcripts, but I mean, at the time of the Buddha, of course, nothing was written down at that time, but I mean, from his teachings and stuff, yeah, it was oral. I think
Like
the first, I think the first written down things was a couple of centuries after the Buddha. The earliest recorded writings, I think, at least a couple of centuries after. But I'm no historian, so I couldn't really comment.
So you say this is based on oral things that certain arhat or something like that told about their own experience.
Of course, again, I'm no historian in terms of the scriptures, but that's basically my understanding, is that it's not like someone just made up an idea, but it's coming from their own experience.
Okay, thank you.
Does the result of one return or a non-return happening in the path of meditation?
Oh, okay.
And
So
the second one, the question, the non-returner, is it just a standard part of the way, or just because a practitioner makes a wish to go there to go to a non-returner?
Right, okay. So there's two questions. The first one is, there's a non-returner on the path of meditation. So path of meditation is part of the model that we're going to look at tomorrow, the model for the Vipassana practice in the Mahayana tradition. That model is that we go through 5 stages. Generally in the Theravada you won't see that model, but in the Mahayana, when they present this model, they try to sort of map it a little bit like we saw in the Shamatha, the 9 stage and the 4 stage. They try and sort of correlate them. So if you try and correlate them as an approximation, this would be more or less what's called the path of seeing, and then these would be on the path of meditation, both of those. So that's the first question. The second one was?
The non-returner, is it a specific wish of the practitioner to go there, or is it a standard? They have to go to the non-returner realm?
Yeah, non-returner is just, I don't want to get too complicated, but there are certain, what they're called fetters, but basically mental afflictions that you want to get rid of, and there are 3 we get rid of here, and then there's another 2, like sensual desire and ill will. The once returner's got rid of sort of most of that, not all. The non-returner's got rid of all of that, sensual desire and ill will. Meaning, because he's got rid of sensual desire, he will never come back to the desire realm because he's got rid of it. But he's still got a few more mental afflictions to get rid of. So either he gets rid of them, or he ends up in some other realm and gets rid of them, and then gets to an arhat. So I didn't want to get too complicated. It can get very complicated. Yeah.
What's nirvana with remainder?
Right. Nirvana with remainder is the with remainder. It depends who you talk to. Here, in this presentation, nirvana without remainder means without the remainder of the body and the mind. No body and mind. So nirvana with remainder is a nirvana with the body and the mind. So we're talking about an arhat. An arhat is nirvana with remainder. When that life finishes, it becomes nirvana without remainder, without the remainder of the body and mind finish. But in tomorrow, when we talk about nirvana with and without remainder, it's a different idea. They don't use it in that sense, but we'll leave it out for now. Otherwise, we just complicate it. Yeah.
Where do hell realm and hungry
Yeah, okay. So often in Buddhism we talk